Okay, a very rare pleasure here. Joining me now is Robert Lighthizer. Bob Lighthizer, former U.S. Trade Representative in the Trump administration. I think he's the best in the business. I'm the only one you'll talk to on the air. Is that true?
That's pretty much true.
That's pretty much it. Yeah. Okay. Kevin McCarthy, we didn't talk about this in our interview today, but, you know, Kevin McCarthy is talking about a special congressional committee to go after China on everything from trade and national security to the origins of COVID and so forth and so on. In your judgment, is that a good idea, special committee?
Yeah, I do. I think that China is an existential threat to the United States. I think it's far more serious than most people realize. I think one of President Trump's greatest accomplishments was raising the alarm on China. They're a threat across the board. And a number of other Democrats and Republicans get a lot of credit for it, too, in helping on this issue. But it really is that important. And I think everyone has to make a fundamental decision. Is China a friend, or are they an aggressive adversary who wants to be number one in the world? And it's a pretty easy decision. If you could have made it 10 years ago, you can certainly make it now. And anyone who doesn't view them as an aggressive, dangerous threat is someone who's either not paying at all attention or is a knave, right? Because it's just no. And so we need a fundamental policy. We need it across the board. The notion that it's just a military or security threat is nonsense. You have to also take on the economics. This confrontation will ultimately be decided by economics, I believe. And by the way, most major power threats really are. Their economy is closer to ours in size than any adversary we have ever had in our history, at least for the last 100 years since we became the biggest country, the biggest economy in the world. So yes, I think it's a good idea, but I think it has to also include economics. And for me, that means we have to have a policy of strategic decoupling. Not decoupling across the board, I would say, but strategic decoupling.
Does anybody, I want to come back to that in just a second, but so Biden and Xi met in Bali. Does anybody know what happened there? I mean, I want to cover this story, but I looked around, I read this, I read that. Editorial opinion was virtually nil. What happened in that meeting of significance?
Well, let me say, first of all, we don't know, and I'm glad we don't, because it means people aren't leaking, at least from our side. We know what the Chinese said, and that is that they gave an account that was rather robust from their point of view. My guess is, having been in a number of those, that the president read his talking points. They probably avoided some of the fundamental issues that you and I would say. They were probably more in the nature of sort of friendly kind of chatter. We have a tendency not to straight up confront China, which we should do. And my real fear is that coming out of that, the analysis from their side, which is the fundamental question, not what you and I think, but what they think, is that there is one of weakness and failure really to confront China. Now look there are people in this administration that get it, that understand and are trying to do the right thing. The question is, does the president get it? And on that, I have real doubt. And if you think of the historic precedents of people who thought they could deal with a hardline, aggressive dictator as if they were another politician, the precedent for that's not good. I mean, if you look, the context is different, but if you look at Chamberlain at Munich, if you look at even Churchill and Roosevelt at Yalta, they took the position that you could take at face value what a person like that would do. And in every case, they were disappointed. And in many cases, it was really a tragic outcome. So, to me, the fundamental question is, do you understand that they're an aggressive adversary? And then everything else flows from it.
Trump rang the bell. You're absolutely right. It was one of his great achievements. The Bidens haven't changed much at one level. I mean, they didn't take back the tariffs. The tariffs are still there. You didn't want the trade part of that big bill, the semiconductor bill, but you won that battle, right? We didn't pull back
That's correct.
On a lot of the protection. What about the stuff you negotiated, though, in the trade deal with China? Intellectual property right theft, forced transfer of technology, two enormously important areas. What's happening with those provisions?
There's two questions. One, what is in the agreement? And two, what are they probably still doing? I believe that at a certain level, they are trying to abide by some elements of that agreement. The systemic things is what you're talking about. Clearly, they didn't do the purchasing like they should have. But the most important thing about that whole agreement was the tariff stayed in place. The tariff stayed in place, and that's a fundamental thing. That's why the agreement is a success and a great, great accomplishment for the president. But they are making some changes in intellectual property, technology transfer, and the like. But look at the director of the FBI today said their industrial espionage and the like is greater threat to us than all the rest of the world combined. So they are a very, very serious problem. And in my opinion, we should be taking more action. We should be doing this thing, which I call strategic decoupling.
Don't mean to interrupt. It just made me think of this. Why don't we throw TikTok out of the U.S.?
Oh, there's just absolutely no question in the world they should do it.
I keep saying this.
Can you imagine us having a similar thing in China? It's unimaginable.
This is a spy operation.
It is a spy
instrumentality of the Chinese Communist Party.
It is so ridiculous that we're allowing them to do that. And it's not like it's some secret technology. You could duplicate it in a heartbeat if you thought it was useful. I mean, the reality is that all we really have to do is just treat them the way they treat us, and a lot of our problems would go away. Pure and simple reciprocity in investment, in trade, across the board, and you would see a lot of these problems disappear. But for sure, TikTok and all the rest of it, we really shouldn't have technological interdependence the way we do. It's a mistake, and it comes from the fundamental question. The people who push it are either people making money and thus don't care, but more likely they're people that haven't addressed the fundamental question. Are they an aggressive threat to the American way of life?
Last minute. Do we have sufficient export controls in the technology sector?
No, absolutely not. Now, I think that the President Trump and Wilbur Ross and you and Stephen Mnuchin and others did an enormous amount to move that in the right direction. But the reality is we need much, much more. We should not have the kind of, certainly no military or joint use technology connection at all. But I would suggest in technology generally, we should be separating ourselves.
Be tougher.
Yeah,
have to be tougher.
Absolutely, much tougher.
You were the leader on this. You were the leader intellectually, and you were the leader on trade negotiations. We did get Huawei out. Okay, that was a plus. But I fear there's no follow-through. I just think there's no follow-through. I think the Bidens are dormant on this whole
See,
subject.
I don't think that President Biden has concluded that they are a problem. I don't think he's concluded it, and that's very scary.
We're running out of time, but you did that beautifully. You hit it. I got to go. Bob Lighthizer, the best of the